Okay, it has been almost a year since my last video. I wanted to talk about a game I tried recently, Anchor Panic. Came out a couple weeks ago. I was trying to re-roll and get, whatever character I wanted, and just as I was re-rolling, I could already tell, like, I am not playing this game. I am not interested in the characters. I'm not gonna play this long term. I do not know what they do. I'm auto-playing everything. I dropped out quickly because I'm trying to get better at identifying which games I'm gonna play long term faster, right? I'm trying to save time. I've invested, sometimes months or years into a game, and then later on I realized I do not care about this game anymore. And I'm trying to pin down what I care about in a game, and I think it's the same thing that I knew for why I quit GFL 2, Girls Frontline 2, and why I quit Nika as well, a year prior. And that's because ultimately in a game I want challenging and engaging combat, but I don't want it to be a huge time sink. And Girl Frontline 2's their guild raid mode took so much time. It was like 5 to 10 minutes a run, multiple times a day for multiple days in a row with no sweep. And BB2's Fiend Hunt, Guild Raid, PvP just got untenable for me to maintain. I know it's not a ton of that time for some of you, but it was for me at the time. I've also made the mistake of trying to place in the top guilds or consistently place high in PvP, and it just takes a lot of time and effort. And I've realized I don't care as much about being part of a team. I just want like a taste of the challenge. And there are some moments, whether it be finally beating Train after 50 tries, or whether it was Modernia or Mother Whale or Material H, whatever that difficult boss was, when you're finally able to beat it after manually clicking because I'm not using a macro with my Alice, or having a Leclis try to 1v5 the enemy team because none of them have a disable or whatever that thing is. She just bonks them to death. It's so much fun to watch when you defeat somebody because you had the better comp, and for that 1v1. I gotta have some depth in the game that I'm playing. But eventually, in a lot of games, the combat becomes repetitive enough that you feel like you're just going through the motions, right? Eventually, Nikke is just clicking on places with different upgrades, right? And eventually, in a game like BD2, there's only so many costumes, and something like PvP, unless they make serious changes, just becomes a bit repetitive and monotonous. And once that happens, I'm only playing the game because of FOMO and the sunk cost effect, and that's when I very quickly get burnt out, and I'm not interested anymore. So, have I finally found a gacha game that can stand on its own as like a fun game that I enjoy playing and doesn't just feel like a combat gimmick to get me to spend money? Not quite, but I'd say it's pretty close. So in the past day and a half or so, I've been trying the closed beta test for Chaos Zero Nightmare. It's a deck building roguelike game where part of your progression is gated behind a standard gacha. So the story follows, and in addition to standard progression through your leveling systems, affection, potential, and of course the dupes they get from the gacha, you can improve your character via save states, and this is a cool mechanic I haven't seen before. So the idea is that when you go through the roguelite mode, you start with only some of your cards. You acquire cards and items through the roguelite, and most of the time when you complete the roguelite, you can save your save state at the end, and you can use that save state in other modes to allow you to defeat bosses more easily in the main story, or when you're doing the simulation thing to grind for different materials to upgrade your characters. And this is where the game gets complex, because like certain upgrades and certain items from the save state can completely open up new playstyles, new power levels. And this game borrows heavily from Slay the Spire and Darkest Dungeon, and I'm sure a bunch of others, but those are the ones that stand out to me and I have the most playtime on of games in a similar genre. I can tell you right now, this game is fun. Like, I played it for several hours in a row, and it wasn't just, oh, I'm trying to up my level and complete stuff. It's fun to do, to watch and combine your use your character's cards in the right order. Like, order matters. It's not just, oh, I don't have enough strength. It's like, well, maybe if I get the right order or I get the right epiphany. The game uses the Darkest Dungeon stress mechanic, but in Darkest Dungeon, it usually is, I think it's like a 75-25 for resulting in affliction and virtue. In this game, it's always affliction, but instead of the virtue mechanic, when you use cards, there's a small chance that any one card has a little gold star in the corner, and they call that an epiphany, and that allows you to either unlock new cards in your deck during the roguelite mode, or to upgrade a card to become a more powerful version of itself. And those upgrades can allow for all kinds of new builds, and I'm sure some of the meta decks will require certain epiphanies. So I'm highly optimistic about this game, but I do see 3 major challenges. The first is, how do you balance rewarding players who want to play the roguelite mode and have fun? And I can say that because burnout can happen for a lot of players. And I think they've already done this pretty well with how the save state mechanic works. When your character dies and they have to go to the trauma room, you have 2 options. You can use cheap currency to bring them back to life, basically. But when you do that, you lose all the save states. Or you can use a currency that you use to build affection with other characters to instead recover your save states. And so it's kind of a trade-off. You lose a little bit of progress if you don't want to go and rebuild the save states yourself. The second thing is, how do you balance the gacha system? And again, every game is going to have to do this to keep everyone happy. And right now, there will always be players who complain. A lot of them will be those free-to-plays and minnows and dolphins. But as always, every game has to be profitable at the end of the day. They have to make money for their investors or the parent company or whoever is paying the bills and keeping the lights on, right? Because these games are developing for years and years and years. They have to make the return on their investment. So at the end of the day, gachas are all in some sense predatory. So I know when players complain about the gacha rates, I'm not necessarily like cheering with them like, oh yeah, the gacha rates are really bad. I understand that games have to make money. Of course, it is fun to fully upgrade your characters. That was one thing I really enjoyed about Brown Dust 2, was even if you were a free to play character, you just got so many pulls, you could fully upgrade some characters. It wouldn't be all of them. Obviously the whales, you leave that for the whales and the high spenders, but even as a free to play, you could unlock quite a few characters. I don't see that quite happening just yet in this game. It will depend. We obviously don't fully know just how generous the game is, but it's always something to be cautious about. And then lastly, and most importantly, the game right now has major clarity issues with mechanics, and is a little scary when the game is probably going to be released in a month or so, of how many typos and inconsistent naming conventions there are everywhere. There is just too much inconsistency. Like, you do not have to look at many cards. Almost every character has some case that you can look at and be like, I don't know what this mechanic is. And in addition to that, there's also UI issues. Probably the most glaring one to me is that sometimes you can select a card and see what a mechanic is on it, but oftentimes you're not able to select a card because you're actually choosing between different options. This is very common for epiphanies. When you get an option, a selection of new cards, and you say, I don't know what that one mechanic is, you actually can't click on that card to see what it does without oftentimes just selecting that card. And so there's ways they can get around this, but in my opinion, this is very, very, very core. It's mandatory if you want players to be engaged in the combat and the strategy of the game for the long term, and not just ultimately develop and devolve into some kind of Gunnar skin game or something like that. So if when you hear Slay the Spire or Darkest Dungeon, you're like, that was my jam, this does a decent shot at emulating that in a gacha style fashion. I'm very supportive of the devs. I wish the game well. They do have a lot of work to do. I understand that with crunch timelines and budgets and them needing to make sure that they get a return at some point, they probably aren't going to wait forever. I don't think the game is like fully ready at this point. I think there's a lot of clarity issues, and that is going to turn away a lot of the player base. It's already frustrating some people in the CBT, but I do think a lot of players also realize there's a lot of potential here. There's a lot of fun to be had. There's just so much to explore. I know a lot of players already say Calipe is the best, but we'll have to see. We'll have to see. We don't know what kind of content there's out there. So I'm excited, and I'll catch you at the release probably sometime in October.